Hello and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we continue our reading of Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. Puck has run across, after many 1,000 years, Wayland the Smith of the Gods, who used to be a god in his own right, but is now just a wayside goblin who will shoe your horse if you leave a penny on the stone. "Isn't there any way for you to get back to Valhalla or wherever you come from?" I said. "I'm afraid not," he said, rasping away at the hoof. He had a wonderful touch with horses. The old beast was whinnying on his shoulder. "You may remember that I was not a gentle god in my day and my time and my power. I shall never be released till some human being truly wishes me well." "Surely," said I, "that farmer can't do less. You're shoeing the horse all round for him." "Yes," he said, "and my nails will hold a shoe from one full moon to the next. But farmers and wheeled clay," he said, "are both uncommon cold and sour." Would you believe it, when that farmer woke and found his horse shod, he rode away without one word of thanks. I was so angry that I wheeled his horse right round and walked him back 3 miles to the beacon, just to teach the old sinner politeness. "Were you invisible?" asked Una. Puck nodded gravely. The beacon was always laid in those days, ready to light in case the French landed at Pevensey, and I walked the horse about and about that long night, summer night. The farmer thought he was bewitched, well, he was, of course, and began to pray and shout. I didn't care. I was as good a Christian as he any fair day in the county, and about 4 o'clock in the morning a young novice came along from the monastery that used to stand on top of Beacon Hill. "What's a novice?" asked Dan. "It really means a man who's beginning to be a monk, but in those days people sent their sons to a monastery just the same as a school. This young fellow had been to a monastery in France for a few months every year, and he was finishing his studies in the monastery close to his home here. Hugh was his name, and he had got up to go fishing hereabouts. His people owned all this valley. Hugh heard the farmer shouting and asked him what in the world he meant. The old man spun him a wonderful tale about fairies and goblins and witches, and I know he hadn't seen a thing except rabbits and red deer all that night. People of the hills are like otters. They don't show themselves except when they choose. But the novice wasn't a fool. He looked down at the horse's feet and saw the new shoes fastened as only Wayland knew how to fasten them. Wayland had a way of turning down the nails that folks call the smith's clinch. Said the novice. "Where'd you get your horse shod?" The farmer wouldn't tell him at first because the priests never liked their people to have any dealings with the old things. At last he confessed that the smith had done it. "What did you pay him?" said the novice. "Penny," said the farmer very sulkily. "That's less than a Christian would have charged," said the novice. "I hope you threw a thank you into the bargain." "No," said the farmer. "Wayland Smith's a heathen." "Heathen or no heathen," said the novice, "you took his help, and where you get help, there you must give thanks." "What?" said the farmer. He was in a furious temper because I was walking the old horse in circles all this time. "What, you young jackanapes," he said, "then by your reasoning I ought to say thank you to Satan if he helped me." "Don't roll about up there splitting reasons with me," said the novice. "Come back to the fort and thank the smith, or you'll be sorry." Back the farmer had to go. I led the horse, though no one saw me, and the novice walked beside us, his gown swishing through the shiny dew, and his fishing rod across his shoulders spearwise. When we reached the fort again, it was 5 o'clock and misty under the oaks. The farmer simply wouldn't say thank you. He said he'd tell the abbot that the novice wanted him to worship heathen gods. Then Hugh, the novice, lost his temper. He just cried, "Out!" put his arm under the farmer's fat leg, and heaved him from his saddle onto the turf. And before he could rise, he caught him by the back of the neck and shook him like a rat, till the farmer growled, "Thank you, Wayland Smith." "Did Wayland see all this?" said Dan. "Oh, yes, and he shouted his old war cry when the farmer thudded onto the ground. He was delighted. Then the novice turned to the oak tree and said, 'Ho, Smith of the Gods, I am ashamed of this rude farmer, but for all you have done in kindness and charity to him and to others of our people, I thank you and wish you well.' Then he picked up his fishing rod, it looked more like a tall spear than ever, and tramped off down your valley." "And what did poor Wayland do?" said Una. "He laughed and he cried with joy because he'd been released at last and could go away. But he was an honest old thing. He had worked for his living, and he paid his debts before he left. "I shall give that novice a gift," said Wayland, "a gift that shall do him good the wide world over and old England after him. Blow up my fire, old thing, while I get the iron for my last task." Then he made a sword, a dark gray wavy-lined sword, and I blew the fire while he hammered. By oak, ash, and thorn, I tell you, Wayland the smith was a smith of the gods. He cooled that sword in running water twice, and the third time he cooled it in the evening dew, and he laid it out in the moonlight and said runes, that's charms, over it, and he carved runes of prophecy on the blade. "Old thing," he told me, wiping his forehead, "this is the best blade that Wayland ever made. Even the user will never know how good it is. Come to the monastery." We went to the dormitory where the monks slept. We saw the novice fast asleep in his cot, and Wayland put the sword into his hand, and I remember the young fellow gripped it in his sleep. Then Wayland strode as far as he dared into the chapel and threw down all his shoeing tools, his hammer and pincher and rasps, to show he had done with them forever. It sounded like suits of armor falling, and the sleepy monks ran in, for they thought the monastery had been attacked by the French. The novice came first of all, waving his new sword and shouting Saxon battle cries. When they saw the shoeing tools, they were very bewildered, till the novice asked leave to speak, and told what he had done to the farmer, and what he had said to Wayland Smith, and how, though the dormitory light was burning, he had found the wonderful rune-carved sword in his cot. The abbot shook his head at first, and then he laughed and said to the novice, "Son Hugh, it needs no sign from a heathen god to show me that you will never be a monk. Take your sword and keep your sword, and go with your sword, and be as gentle as you are strong and courteous. We will hang up the smith's goods before the altar," he said, "because whatever the smith of the gods may have been in the old days, we know that he worked honestly for his living and made gifts to Mother Church." They all went to bed again except the novice, and he sat up in the garth playing with his sword. Then Wayland said to me by the stables, "Farewell, old thing, you had the right of it. You saw me come to England, and you see me go. Farewell." With that, he strode down the hill to the corner of the great woods, Wood's Corner, you call it, to the very place where he had first landed, and I heard him moving through the thickets towards Horsebridge for a little, and then he was gone. That was how it happened. I saw it. Both children drew a long breath. "But what happened to Hugh the novice?" said Una. "And the sword," said Dan. Puck looked down the meadow that lay all quiet and cool in the shadow of Pook's hill. A corncrake jarred in a hayfield nearby, and the small trouts of the brook began to jump. A big white moth flew unsteadily from the alders and flapped round the children's heads, and the least little haze of water mist rose from the brook. "Do you really want to know?" Puck said. "We do," cried the children, "awfully." "Very good. I promised you that you shall see what you shall see, and you shall hear what you shall hear, though it shall have happened 3,000 years. But just now it seems to me that unless you go back to the house, people will be looking for you. I'll walk with you as far as the gate." "Will you be here when we come again?" they asked. "Surely, surely," said Puck. "I've been here some time already. 1 minute first, please." He gave them each 3 leaves, one of oak, one of ash, and one of thorn. "Bite these," he said. "Otherwise you might be talking at home of what you've seen and heard, and if I know human beings, they'd send for the doctor. Bite." They bit hard and found themselves walking side by side to the lower gate. Their father was leaning over it. "And how did your play go?" he asked. "Oh, splendidly," said Dan. "Only afterwards I think we went to sleep. It was very hot and quiet. Don't you remember, Una?" She shook her head and said nothing. "I see," said her father. Late, late in the evening, Kilmeny came home, for Kilmeny had been she could not tell where, and Kilmeny had seen what she could not declare. "But why are you chewing leaves at your time of life, daughter? For fun?" "No, it was for something, but I can't exactly remember," said Una. And neither of them could, until a tree song. Of all the trees that grow so fair old England to adorn, greater are none beneath the sun than oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all of a midsummer's morn. Surely we sing of no little thing in oak and ash and thorn. Oak of the clay lived many a day or ever Aeneas began. Ash of the loam was a lady at home when Brute was an outlaw man. Thorn of the down saw new Troy town, from which was London born. Witness hereby the ancient tree of oak and ash and thorn. Yew that is old in churchyard mold, he breedeth a mighty bow. Alder for shoes do wise men choose, and beech for cups also. But when ye have killed, and your bowl is spilled, and your shoes are clean outworn, back ye must speed for all that ye need to oak and ash and thorn. Ellum she hateth mankind, and wait till every gust be laid, to drop a limb on the head of him that anywise trusts her shade. But whether a lad be sober or sad, or mellow with ale from the horn, he'll take no wrong when he lieth along neath oak and ash and thorn. Oh, do not tell the priest our plight, or he would call it a sin, but we have been out in the woods all night, a conjuring summer in. And we bring you news by word of mouth, good news for cattle and corn. Now is the sun come up from the south with oak and ash and thorn. Sing oak and ash and thorn, good sirs, all of a midsummer's morn. England shall bide till judgment tide by oak and ash and thorn. Young Men at the Manor. They were fishing a few days later in the bed of the brook that for centuries had cut deep into the soft valley soil. The trees closing overhead made long tunnels through which the sunshine worked in blobs and patches. Down in the tunnels were bars of sand and gravel, old roots and trunks covered with moss or painted red by the irony water, foxgloves growing lean and pale toward the light, clumps of fern and thirsty, shy flowers who could not live away from moisture and shade. In the pools you could see the wave thrown up by the trouts as they charged hither and yon, and the pools were joined to each other, except in flood time, when all was one brown rush, by sheets of thin, broken water that poured themselves chuckling round the darkness of the next bend. This was one of the children's most secret hunting grounds, and their particular friend, old Hobden the hedger, had shown them how to use it. Except for the click of a rod hitting a low willow, or a switch and tussle among the young ash leaves as the line hung up for a minute, nobody in the hot pasture could have guessed what game was going on among the trouts below the banks. "We've got half a dozen," said Dan after a warm, wet hour. "I vote we go up to Stone Bay and try Long Pool." Una nodded. Most of her talk was by nods, and they crept from the gloom of the tunnels toward the tiny weir that turns the brook into the mill stream. Here the banks are low and bare, and the glare of the afternoon sun on the Long Pool below the weir makes your eyes ache. When they were in the open, they nearly fell down with astonishment. A huge gray horse, whose tail hairs crinkled the glassy water, was drinking in the pool, and the ripples about his muzzle flashed like melted gold. On his back sat an old, white-haired man dressed in a loose, glimmery gown of chain-mail. He was bareheaded, and a nut-shaped iron helmet hung at his saddle-bow. His reins were of red leather, 5 or 6 inches deep, scalloped at the edges, and his high padded saddle with its red girths was held fore and aft by a red leather breastband and crupper. "Look," said Una, as though Dan were not staring his eyes very out of his head. "It looks like the picture from your room, Sir Isumbras at the ford." The rider turned toward them, and his long, thin face was just as sweet and gentle as that of the knight who carries the children in that picture. "They should be here now, Sir Richard," said Puck's deep voice among the willow herb. "They are here," the knight said, and he smiled at Dan with the string of trouts in his hand. "There seems no great change in boys since mine fished this water." "If your horse is drunk, we shall be more at ease in the ring," said Puck, and he nodded to the children as though he had never magicked away their memories a week before. The great horse turned and hoisted himself into the pasture with a kick and a scramble that tore clods down, rattling. "Your pardon," said Sir Richard to Dan. "When these lands were mine, I never loved that mounted men should cross the brook except by the paved ford. But my swallow here was thirsty, and I wished to meet you." "We're very glad you've come, sir," said Dan. "It doesn't matter in the least about the banks." He trotted across the pasture on the sword side of the mighty horse, and it was a mighty iron-handled sword that hung from Sir Richard's belt. Una walked beside with Puck. She remembered everything now. "I'm sorry about the leaves," he said, "but it would never have done if you had gone home and told, would it?" "I suppose not," Una answered, "but you said that all the people of the hills had left England." "So they have, but I told you that you should come and go and look and know, didn't I? The knight isn't a fairy. He's Sir Richard Dallingbridge, a very old friend of mine. He came over with William the Conqueror, and he wants to see you particularly." "What for?" said Una. "On account of your great wisdom and learning," Puck replied without a twinkle. "Us?" said Una. "Why, I don't know my 9 times, not to say it dodging, and Dan makes the most awful mess of fractions. He can't mean us." "Una," Dan called back, "Sir Richard says he's going to tell us what happened to Welland's sword. He's got it. Isn't it splendid?" "Nay, nay," said Sir Richard, dismounting as they reached the ring in the bend of the Millbank stream. "It is you that must tell me, for I hear the youngest child in our England today is as wise as our wisest clerk." He slipped the bit out of Swallow's mouth, dropped the ruby-red reins over his head, and the wise horse moved off to graze. Sir Richard, they noticed he limped a little, unslung his great sword. "That's it," Dan whispered to Una. "This is the sword that Brother Hugh had from Wayland Smith," said Sir Richard. "Once he gave it to me, but I would not take it. But at the last it became mine after such a fight as never christened man fought. See?" He half drew it from its sheath and turned it before them. On either side just now, the handle, where the runic letters shivered as though they were alive, were 2 deep gouges in the dull, deadly steel. "Now, what thing made those?" said he. "I know not, but you perhaps can say." "Tell them all the tale, Sir Richard," said Puck. "It concerns their land somewhat." Yes, from the very beginning," Una pleaded, for the knight's good face and smile on it more than ever reminded her of Sir Isumbras at the ford. They settled down to listen. Sir Richard, bareheaded to the sunshine, dangled the sword in both hands, while the grey horse cropped outside the ring and the helmet on the saddle-bow clinged softly each time he jerked his head. "From the beginning, then," said Sir Richard, "since it concerns your land, I will tell the tale. When our Duke came out of Normandy to take his England, great knights, have ye heard, came and drove hard to serve the Duke, because he promised them lands here, and small knights followed the great ones. My folk in Normandy were poor, but a great knight, Engerard of the Eagle, Engenulf of d'Aquila, who was kin to my father, followed the Earl of Mortain, who followed William the Duke, and I followed d'Aquila. Yes, with 30 men at arms out of my father's house and a new sword, I set out to conquer England 3 days after I was made a knight. I did not know that England would conquer me. We went up to Santlache with the rest, a very great host of us." "Does that mean the Battle of Hastings, 1066? Una whispered, and Puck nodded so as not to interrupt. "At Santlache, over yonder hill," he pointed southeast toward Fairlight, "we found Harold's men. We fought. At the day's end they ran. My men went with d'Aquila's to chase and plunder, and in that chase Engerard of the Eagle was slain, and his son Gilbert took his banner and his men forward. This I did not know till after, for Swallow here was cut in the flank, so I stayed to wash the wound at a brook by a thorn. There a single Saxon cried out to me in French, and we fought together. I should have known his voice, but we fought together. For a long time neither had any advantage, till by pure ill fortune his foot slipped and his sword flew from his hand. Now I had but newly been made knight, and wished above all to be courteous and fameworthy, so I forbore to strike and bade him get his sword again. "A plague on my sword," said he. "It has lost me my first fight. You have spared my life. Take my sword." He held it out to me, but as I stretched my hand, the sword groaned like a stricken man, and I leaped back, crying, "Sorcery!" The children looked at the sword as though it might speak again. Suddenly a clump of Saxons ran out upon me, and seeing a Norman alone would have killed me, but my Saxon cried out that I was his prisoner and beat them off. Thus, you see, he saved my life. He put me on my horse and led me through the woods 10 long miles to this valley. "To here, do you mean?" said Una. "To this very valley. We came in by the lower ford under the King's Hill yonder." He pointed eastward where the valley widens. "And was that Saxon Hugh the Novice?" Dan asked. "Yes, and more than that. He had been for 3 years at the monastery at Bec by Ruin, where," Sir Richard chuckled, "the abbot Herlin would not suffer me to remain." "Why wouldn't he?" said Dan. "Because I rode my horse into the refectory when the scholars were at meat to show the Saxon boys we Normans were not afraid of an abbot. It was that very Saxon Hugh tempted me to do it, and we had not met since that day. I thought I knew his voice even inside my helmet, and for all that our lords fought, we each rejoiced we had not slain the other. He walked by my side, and he told me how a heathen god he believed had given him his sword, but he said he had never heard it sing before. I remember I warned him to beware of sorcery and quick enchantments." Sir Richard smiled to himself. "I was very young, very young." And we'll see more of how Sir Richard and Hugh get along, even though they were enemies in battle, next time.